Welcome back to the second part of this lecture. So in the first part, we've focused on setting the scene of the party that Socrates and everyone else is at. It's Cephalus' house. Getting into this discussion about justice and morality. So you might want to have been thinking, well, what's the difference between morality and justice? What's the difference between what's good and what's just? The thought here is that justice is a virtue. Virtues are typically thought of as character traits or made up of character traits. So if you have particular virtues, then that will be in some way aspects of your character. So if you have the virtue of justice, then you're inclined towards doing what's just. So it's an excellence that you might have, in particular situations where there's opportunities to steal or not steal, you will do the just and right thing, or the just and good thing. And if that's not stealing, that's what you'll do. And if it happens to be stealing, because perhaps maybe the virtuous person has to steal in certain situations, then you'll steal it. Not only will you do it, but you'll do it for the right kind of reason. You'll do it because it's the just and good thing to do. The thought here is that if you're a perfectly good agent, if such things exist, if you're a perfectly good agent, then you will have all the virtues, all the excellencies. So in all the situations, you'll act on what's just, you'll act on what's benevolent, and so on. You'll make sure that you do everything that's good. And so a perfectly good agent will always be just. They'll make sure that they do things for the right reason and in the right situations, and they'll only upset those people who deserve it, and they'll make sure they're nice to everyone else, steal only when it's morally necessary, and otherwise, when it's morally wrong, not do it. They'll lie when it's necessary, but tell the truth when that's necessary. And they'll always be informed and be reflective in doing it for the right and proper reasons. So Plato himself, he agrees with all of this. He's not a moral skeptic. We're going to put in brackets here, practical moral skeptic, because as we'll see, the question about whether we should be morally good involve one of the answers is a kind of moral skepticism. So if you're going to say, well, I shouldn't be good, there's no morally good reason for me to good, then you're a kind of moral skeptic. You think that morality doesn't give you reasons to actually be moral. So why be moral? The answer is, well, why be moral? No, there's no reason to. Put practical in brackets here because there are many forms of moral skepticism. I want you to be aware that when we're talking about moral skepticism in this section, we're thinking about this practical moral skepticism. There's lots of different types of moral skepticism, and they shouldn't be confused with practical moral skepticism, the question of whether morality motivates us to actually be moral or gives us sufficient motivation. And as we'll see, whilst Plato is not a practical moral skeptic, or just moral skeptic for short, in the rest of this lecture and the rest of this section, some of his interlocutors seem to be moral skeptics. They don't think we should be moral. They think, in fact, that's not really what we should do, or at least we shouldn't be moral, as we'll see, for moral reasons. And someone who's not a moral skeptic thinks we should actually be moral for moral reasons. So after Cephalus leaves Thrasymachus, as I'm going to call him, rightly or wrongly, he's been listening to this whole discussion between Socrates and Cephalus and others. He's getting incensed. He's getting annoyed. He thinks that Socrates is just a bit of a moron. Like, oh, Socrates, you're always telling us what's good and right. And in fairness to Thrasymachus, Socrates does come across as a fairly annoying person. He may well be right about morality and other things, but he does come across as a fairly annoying person. But that doesn't mean that we should disagree with Socrates and agree with Thrasymachus or any other opponent of Socrates in the dialogues and Plato's dialogues. We should look at their arguments and their reasons. So Thrasymachus thinks that, Socrates is just this like buzzkill, boring kind of guy, always trying to ruin everyone's fun by telling them what's morally right and wrong. Just like, live your life and be like this. Thrasymachus isn't concerned with just ignoring Socrates. He doesn't just want to ignore Socrates. He really wants to engage with him and show Socrates why Socrates is wrong. And he wants Socrates to accept it. And he wants him to really see the error of his ways and that, we shouldn't be moral. Like, or morality at least doesn't give us good enough reason to be moral. So Thrasymachus presents Socrates with what seems to be a fairly strong skeptical challenge. Before we consider this skeptical challenge, let's consider some more things about Thrasymachus. So Thrasymachus is a sophist, or was a sophist. And so you may have heard people say, well, that's sophistry or that kind of thing. The sophists survive in popular thought as people who engaged in fallacious arguments. And there's good reason for that, because back in ancient Greek times, back in Plato and Socrates' time, the sophists were people who used rhetoric to make money and debate with others without really believing the things that they said. They were willing to argue any point in a way that was disingenuous. They weren't just engaged in it for, art. We will sometimes in the philosophy classroom defend points we don't believe, but not because we're sophists, but because it's a way of learning the weaknesses of views we do defend. So sometimes you'll be asked, and I will ask you in some of the exercises we do, to engage, defend an argument that you don't believe in. Why? Because it will help you learn about weaknesses in a view that you may like. So it's a useful exercise. But the sophists weren't engaged in this defending views they didn't believe as a way of educating people about how to argue better or improve arguments for the views they did believe in or things like this. They just didn't really endorse anything. They were, a bit hollow, a bit empty, a bit shallow. They were concerned with money, they're concerned with power. They didn't really want to find out what was true, what was correct, what was morally right or wrong, or what was even true in reality. They didn't care about that. They just cared about making money and advancing themselves in society. So one of the things they often did was to defend people in court. If they're really good arguers, people who could really argue any point, they could defend a murderer, they could defend a thief, they could also defend innocent people, because they had these great skills in arguing. So they could defend someone's innocence or defend a correct view, but they wouldn't be defending it because it was a correct view or because the person was innocent. They'd just be doing it to win the argument and make money, and that's all they cared about. So in the context of defending people in court, they were kind of like the ancestors of modern day lawyers. The moral criticism that you might have of lawyers is that they're just willing to defend anyone. Of course, everyone has a right to a defense, so there's a morally praiseworthy motivation for certain lawyers. So as I mentioned here, Thrasymachus thinks Socrates is a bit of a bore. He's just this poor guy who goes around with no shoes, has some following of these lackeys, these people who just listen to what he says and say, yes, Socrates, oh, you're correct, Socrates, which you'll notice is something that happens in the dialogues quite a lot. So Thrasymachus is not having any of it. He thinks, this Socrates guy needs to be put in his place. He is an idiot. He could be making a lot of money arguing. He's so good at arguing. Why don't you just argue for things that are false? That will really prove you're a good arguer. So Thrasymachus' skeptical challenge is that, he thinks that, justice is nothing more than the advantage of the stronger. So you might have heard the phrase might is right. It's inspired by this kind of point. So the thought here is to go, what is correct, what's right? It's just what the strong say, what the mighty say. And that's it. There's nothing else going on. We're just told by the powerful, the strong, that this is correct, and that's what is correct. They're strong, they're powerful, they determine it. So think about it this way. Common sense says that justice is following the rules. Thrasymachus is thinking, well, who decides what these rules are? Where do these rules come from? And he's like, well, the most powerful. It's the most powerful people who make the rules. They tell us what's right and wrong. And that's why we think certain things are right and wrong. Don't steal, don't lie, don't murder, don't kill, don't cheat on people, this kind of thing. These rules are just made by the powerful, right? That's why we believe them. Our parents tell us them. Why do our parents tell them? Their parents tell them. Society tells us them. The police, the courts, priests, teachers, lecturers, philosophers. These could be powerful people in society, and they are the ones that tell us what the rules are. And we follow those rules. Why do we follow them? Because they're powerful, right? Why do you not commit crimes? Thrasymachus will say, well, because the police who are powerful are telling you, the government and their instruments of violence, like the police and the army, they help them enforce these rules, and they're the powerful ones. And Thrasymachus goes a little bit further. He says, well, what rules do they make up? What are the rules? What are the rules that the powerful make up? Like, he says, well, look, they make up the ones that are in their best interest. They don't care about this morality stuff that you keep harping on about, Socrates. The powerful just put rules in place because it's in their best interest. Why shouldn't we lie? Why shouldn't we steal? Well, if you're a government and there's a bunch of shopkeepers, and you don't want people to lie. You don't want these weak kind of individual people lying to you. Why? Because you want them to know the truth, because it's easier to control them. If they're lying, you don't really know where they stand and where they are. Are they loyal citizens or not? We don't know. We don't know. So we tell them not to lie, so we know where they stand on things. We know if they're loyal citizens. We don't want them to steal, because our society would crumble if everyone keeps stealing from everyone. And that's in the interest of the people who are presently powerful. And that's why we have these rules, according to Thrasymachus. So here we're thinking both about legal and moral rules. So we might think, yeah, there's certain laws that are put in place because they're bad. But things is true of moral rules. We'll think that those legal rules are also moral rules because the powerful tell us so. Importantly, he thinks they're doing what's in their best interest. Why? Because they're powerful. So for Thrasymachus, he thinks, well, look, justice, the rules that we follow, that's just of what's to the advantage of the most powerful or the stronger. So when he's talking about the stronger, he's thinking of the most powerful. Not just about physical strength, but about what you might call social strength, the kind of social power you have. If you can call in armies and police and other enforcers, you have power in society, or any other mechanisms that you might have. He thinks that, look, that's what justice is. Let's not be fooled. There's not something deeper here. Morality, the law, that's all just in the service of powerful interests. So after it looks as if he's maybe cornered Socrates, he calls Socrates a child and gives a famous speech. Just going to summarize the speech, Thrasymachus' speech here. So he thinks that, look, crooked politicians are the ones who always do better than honest ones. Now, perhaps there's some truth in that, if you think about what we think of politicians generally and what life seems to be like. So maybe Thrasymachus is onto something, right? Crooked politicians do tend to do better than honest ones. Okay. And then Thrasymachus goes further. He says, well, I want you to consider the completely unjust man, right? The completely unjust man. What could that person be like? Well, he does whatever he wants. He just does whatever he wants. So someone is completely corrupt and takes full power, we don't condemn them, right? If somebody becomes the powerful dictator of the world or just our country, we don't say, oh my God, that's so morally bad, at least not publicly, right? But Thrasymachus thinks, no, you actually end up admiring that person or saying how great they are, at least in public. We'll all be expressing admiration, even if we don't really feel it. Oh, look how great this person is. They're so powerful. They've broken all the rules and done everything that we said was wrong previously, but let's say that they're great. And of course, that situation might be terrible for everyone, but for the powerful person who took over and has all the power, it's great for them. They didn't follow any of the rules, they got all the power, and now everyone's saying how great they are. Win-win for the powerful person, lose-lose for everyone else. So Thrasymachus' challenge is really here is that he thinks the life of injustice is better than the life of justice. As we were going to put it, the immoral life is better than the moral life. Why be good? Thrasymachus thinks we shouldn't be. We shouldn't be good.